Air. All right, and welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova, and I've got with me the one, the only Zach Hing, YouTube sensation man. Introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Mekel, for having me. I'm Zach. I'm a political and social commentator. And I think a lot of the things that I cover on my YouTube channel range from conservative commentary to, pointing out some of the flawed ideologies on the left, as well as doing some like red pill commentary here and there as far as, an attack on masculinity is concerned, because that is something that is very evident in our current society today. So.
Yeah, definitely, man. And if you people haven't already, make sure you go and subscribe to his YouTube channel. Follow him on Instagram and Twitter. Links to everything is down in the description below the video and the podcast if you're listening to it. And Zach, just give us a brief background on yourself, man. Like, how did you get involved in political commentary? Like, what motivated you?
I think that I had a lot of these views, sort of more. I wasn't as vocal about them. I spoke about this in my walkaway journey where I kind of got red pilled. I was seeing a lot of the attack on free speech happening at Berkeley with the protests of Milo Yiannopoulos a couple of years ago, back in February of, I think, 2017. And this was happening across the board with conservative commentators like Ben Shapiro and Ann Coulter. And, that's what really kind of started me on it, because I became more fixated on the content as to what these people had to say. And I found that a lot of what they were talking about was very closely aligned with what my real values were growing up. And, even though I had more sort of leftist conformist aspects, I was never okay with the fact that we were so intolerant of other ideas that didn't necessarily fit the progressive agenda. And so because of a lot of the hypocrisy, a lot of the bigotry and the intolerance that was starting to happen, I decided I think it was in midway through 2018 where I started to take my opinions to YouTube and talk about them more openly. If you watch some of my earlier videos, they're kind of random and sporadic, just while I was trying to find my stride. But, walkaway happened, and it happened the summer of 2018. So I kind of fell very closely in line with what that was going on. I had a walkaway journey where I, told everybody I was basically denouncing the left and talking really about what my true feelings are and my true values. And that's kind of what got the ball rolling. Ever since then, it's just been me expressing my views on a lot of different issues that need to be talked about.
And would you say like it's there's been a bit of a political awakening and ideological awakening as well since Donald Trump took office? Because I feel like, some people say, oh, his rhetoric is divisive or he's emboldening, white supremacy. But at the same time, I feel like it woke a lot of people up, because I'd say from 2017 to last year is kind of when I started becoming more aware of what's politically going on. And it's really something when you see people that, because I was a leftist liberal for years, and then it got to a point for me where I just realized a lot of that doesn't make sense. Like, I'm mixed, Black, Samoan, Hawaiian, and more. And I was raised around a lot of people that said, oh, because you're Black or you're Polynesian or whatever, that you are oppressed. You'll have it harder. You'll never be able to achieve this or achieve that. And everything is predicated by the color of your skin. And when I started listening to people that were on the right, that your skin color doesn't really, dictate what you can do, it started to make me question the leftist ideology. And then I just got to a point where, in the last year and a half, where I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. Like, a lot of the stuff that liberals just throw at us all the time, or the left throws, and it's like, I don't get it. Like, the whole white privilege thing is untrue. But
yeah, I think that while people start to grow and start to be able to absorb a lot of the information is out there, especially with the election of Donald Trump, I think a lot of people who weren't as plugged into politics started to pay more attention. I think what got brought more to the forefront was that aspect of racial identity, as it has to do with a lot, because I think when it came with the power of speech, when it came to talking about, like, I mean, a lot of their leftist rhetoric, even to this day, is the fact that he's a Nazi, he's a racist, right? And I think that I've said many times that I don't always appreciate or even support a lot of what our president says, even though I can support him as a whole when it comes to bettering American society as a whole. And you know, it's weird to say this, but the irony is sometimes when it comes to somebody who is outspoken like Trump, who's definitely not politically correct, right? Which is where America was for the past 8 years, with racial divisions under the Obama administration. It threw a wrench in a lot of people. And one of two things happened. The tribalism on the left became greater, but then a lot of people, I would like to think with people with common sense and were informed, also started to go, well, wait a minute. I mean, I don't have to support everything, but there's some truth here, right? Mm-hmm. And the intolerance, because of different ideas, is going to be more toxic to the rhetoric of the left than anything else. And that's why there's all these rules with social justice. That's why there's all these constructs that they tell you are in place, you know, because of your racial identity. And, you know, like you said, you know, we're both we're both of a minority group, a minority demographic, yet look at all the progress that America has made in the past 40 years. You know, there are some undeniable aspects under this administration, which is, you know, employment being at an all-time high for minority populations, not just blacks, but with Latinos, right? Mm-hmm. Or the fact that, you know, a black president held office for the past 8 years that oftentimes people dismiss because there are still aspects of white supremacy and privilege that still exist. Now, I think in isolated incidences, mm-hmm. prejudice is still there. I'm not going to deny that racism doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the systems in place in our country, you know, people like you and me, I mean, we have just as much opportunity as anybody else does in this country. And I think that people started to become more aware of that with Trump taking office.
Definitely. And, you know, speaking of which, I just want to, I'd like to ask you, like, and get your perspective. Why do you think so many people hate Trump? Because I've noticed, like, when you ask the common person, when I've asked people, like, why do they hate him? Mm-hmm. All they do is just regurgitate talking points that they've heard on CNN or MSNBC or whatever. Like, they never really research anything themselves, especially on, you know, Facebook. I see a lot of people say, man, I hate Trump. I can't believe he's doing that. And they're reposting something from like 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I'll comment like, did you read this article? Because this is old. And they'll be like, well, it still applies today. But they don't even know why they hate him other than they're being told to. And I think that the lack of critical thinking is not only preposterous, but it's mm-hmm. scary.
Yeah. I think that unfortunately, Trump being elected was the biggest up yours to the Democrat Party. It was the biggest kind of upset politically in our country because a lot of identity and agenda was riding on it. Mm-hmm. Now, let's look at our education system, right? Because when it comes to the fundamentals of critical thinking, that's where I'd like to think that people start to formulate their own opinions and learn about new things. Schools have become very, very progressive leaning, right? And I think we live in a feminized society. I think a lot of this comes back to the feminization of a lot of things. And it's not just in regards to men and women, but in how policies get administered, you know, how now we tend to value feelings over fact. So mm-hmm. we're going to use prejudice and we're going to use direct things that the president has said that may not actually be racist, but they may not be nice. But we use that as an attack on you. We interpret that as hate speech. Now, to tie it back to, you know, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump during that 2016 run, that was an upset because here you had a Democrat presidential candidate who had tried once before in the past, right? A woman president who claimed to stand for, you know, racial diversity and all the things that the left plays to, you know, with Democrats and all of that. And she was a woman, right? And the biggest upset wasn't the fact that that Trump won. It was the fact that, you know, she had everything. She had the backing of everyone. and she still lost. You know, she still lost to someone like Trump. And I think that that's why a lot of the left is still kind of butthurt by that. They don't investigate the facts because of that. Because I think if the tribalism wasn't that crazy between the two of them, you know, there's no chance that she would lose against Trump. We would actually have a lot of people who are going to look beyond the individual and see the facts for what they are, because I think that there's just a lot of emotion invested in this, you know. Like Clinton represented the feminist champion of this country, and pretty much most of what we look at as far as our society is concerned with Western civilization, everything is feminized now. And Trump is the antithesis of all of that. So like you said, you know, when people react like, you didn't even read it, you didn't do anything, it doesn't matter. It's not the fact of what he's done. It's what he represents, what he's said. He's a man. He's a straight alpha man, which is basically everything that you can't be on a social justice checklist, and the one thing that the left opposes in this country. So to have that would mean there's nothing left to talk about. So when you say like, I don't get it, man, you didn't even read the article. Oh, because we have a straight white man in office. Everything they don't want is there. So they're not even going to look beyond the individual and look at the good he's done. And I think that that's the reason why people have become so tribal, and why people don't even bother investigating the facts. You know, it's all about identity at the end of the day.
Yeah. You know, and that's like one of the things I see a lot, and it baffles me, man. Like the hatred in and of itself towards Trump, and he's everything that a feminist just they I don't get it. I don't. And you'll see how they say, oh, his language, he's so domineering, he's so, you know, X, Y, and Z, but then you'll see a lot of feminists that try to replicate or the masculine traits or the alpha traits that he has.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, are you serious? Are we I don't, but it goes back to something Coach Redpill he said to me, and I know he said it on your one-on-one with him as well, where he said trying to understand this with logic is kind of like a failed thing,
right?
Because there's no logic there.
Absolutely. And again, I don't want to come off sounding like, you know, a typical Western chauvinist here, but when it comes to decision making and when it comes to Clinton's campaign as a whole, it was built off of the aspect of identity politics, off of emotion. You know, it's vote for me because I'm a woman, not vote for me because I can get the job done. And, you know, again, when you take logic out of the equation, do you really think people are going to be concerned with facts at the end of the day? It's not going to matter. It's going to be more about how they feel. I'm still hurt over the fact that Clinton lost, which is why I act this way. Look at how Antifa behaves. Look at how some of these feminists behave. There is no reasoning with some of these people, especially when truth has to do with it. They don't want truth. They just want whatever it is they're searching for to be defined. And I think that the reason why that's flawed is because whenever I ask these people, all right, define white privilege, define equal opportunities that are not being afforded to you right now. Number one, two things happen. Either they don't know what it is, they can't adequately define white privilege or anything, but they keep moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
The reason why Asians do well is because of white supremacy. I saw a ridiculous article, and I think Matt Christensen covered this on his channel, about how people are now talking about how the weather now disproportionately affects different races of people, like climate change is racist. Like, it's like, if you live in colder places like Minnesota or whatever, where it's predominantly white, I would argue that obviously white people have a worse time because it snows more in Minnesota. But people are now saying all kinds of outrageous things, all on the basis of feeling, not fact. So, I mean, that's the crazy thing about where we're at right now with people. I just think that I think that there's no logic. You know, there's no independent thought when it comes to the left right now, because it's promotion of a toxic feminist progressive ideal that has contaminated our society. You know, I will say that first and foremost, because it extends beyond politics. You know, it affects, you know, men. There's an attack on masculinity. I really do think so. There's the destruction of the family unit, which plays into the Democrat ideal of administering welfare to single parents.
Yeah.
It's all related, right? And it's like, I talked to this on another channel, and I know I've been ranting for a bit, but the last thing I'll say is this, man. Like, it all happened after the 60s, right? When we had the Civil Rights Act, that was everything that we needed to function as a society when it came to the Equal Pay Act, when it came to equal opportunities under the law, which we have equal opportunities under law, where it came to employment or representation or anything like that. And that doesn't mean it dismisses racism, but that's the thing, is at the same time we weren't just administering welfare, we were administering birth control and abortion and everything. And when you look at it from the man's perspective, what that did was it took the family unit apart, because now all of a sudden you didn't have to be married to have children. There's all kinds of things that happened as a result of that. And it actually meant that after that, you could almost say that women got more power. Now, I'm not going to be that person that says women can't vote or can't hold a position of office, but because that happened, and all of a sudden now promiscuity and all of these Western ideals kind of fell apart, was more encouraged. We see that seeping into politics. We see that seeping into every facet of our culture right now. And, I really think that needs to be corrected. I really think that it's all interrelated and everything. It's more about the feminine imperative and the feminist ideal more so than anything. It's, led to the destruction of a lot of our Western cultures as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Hey man, you can say as much as you want. The Casanova podcast, man, you can ramble if you want. If you want to go all in on topics, there's no holes barred, no filter, just raw, straight. That's how we do it out here in Hawaii. We have no filter, which is funny how left Hawaii is in that sense. But if I talked about what's really going on in Hawaii, a lot of people would never want to come out here. There's so much that's wrong out here. We had, especially on this island, on Oahu, we've had so many of our parks shut down because of the insane amount of the homelessness. And I did a video about that, and I've gotten a lot of people angry saying that I'm part of the white system that's causing the homelessness to happen. But yeah, the homelessness out here is rampant. You can't go to any park without seeing tents just up there, and I think it's almost as bad as it is in LA. And when we have people coming up that want to do something different, we've had politicians that have tried to put policies in effect, and people out here, I don't know what the reason is, they keep voting Democrat regardless. And then they'll say nothing out here in Hawaii changes. The homelessness issue, the roads, all the things that we have going on out here. They say, oh, it doesn't matter if we vote because it's not going to make a difference. That's why I don't vote. And it's like, if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting something different to happen, then that's insanity. And I don't understand that. And then you've got the whole white hatred out here is really bad.
Really?
Is really bad. And especially if you go outside of a tourist area, you'll run into it really badly. We have immigration issues here where people come from other islands. It's really bad. They don't try to talk about that either. We had an issue a couple months ago, and I did a video about that, where there was a Japanese tourist that came here, and he was savagely beaten to the point where both his orbital eye sockets were busted up, his eyes were swollen shut.
Really?
Knocked out. Yeah. And it was so bad that Japan warned their citizens about coming here. And the politicians, the Democratic politicians, say that's not the aloha spirit. That's not how we do things out here. And this is such a random occurrence. But they basically swept it under the rug, and people don't talk about it. We have a real demographic of people coming here, and typically it's from Micronesia, or some people coming from Samoa, some from Tonga, some from Guam, a lot of primarily from Micronesia that just don't. Sorry about the noise of that. People, that happens if you're watching the Casanova podcast. You're used to all that noise happening. So hey, we keep it rolling. But yeah, primarily from Micronesia, when they come here, they don't assimilate to Western culture,
Right.
and it's just a clash. And you know, you got a lot
A
of
lot.
tribalism, and it's just really bad out here, you know. And then you got the human trafficking issues that was going on, which led to why Waikiki shut down almost every single club or nightclub that we had, because you had girls from the mainland, girls internationally, girls from other islands coming here, going to a club at night and missing, you know. And it's there's a lot that just happens that
Wow.
just doesn't get covered.
I had no idea that that kind of racial intolerance, not just for white people, but for people of other races, was so evident. So, who is the primary demographic of people in Hawaii? I mean, I would assume it's Native Hawaiians and.
Nope, they're at the very, very bottom.
So then, like, yeah, I mean, again, I am ignorant when it comes to Hawaii. I've never been there. I don't know anything about Hawaii except what I see in movies. I have a couple of friends that live there, but you know, it's like I don't know anything about Hawaii. So, actually, what is it like in Hawaii when it comes to racial diversity and political ideology?
Typically, politically ideology, which is this is the interesting thing. The culture of Hawaiian Polynesians is conservative, but
Okay.
politically leaning, everyone votes Democrat or left, and they are for policies that contradict the conservative values that we have. So that's one dichotomy. The racial majority out here is Asian, actually. Japanese or Chinese. They're the majority. After them, you have I want to say there's Filipinos are the second majority out here.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have people from mixed between Tonga and Samoa. Then you have Micronesians, and at the very, very, very bottom, you have Hawaiians.
Mm-hmm.
And the intolerance there, certain parts, I know, especially out here on Oahu, certain areas you go to, you'll see a cluster of a certain ethnic group and a
Right.
certain class. Like if you go to Hawaii Kai, you primarily are going to have what they call haoles or white people.
Mm-hmm.
Over there, that's the richer area. You have Asians, you have the upper class Filipinos, and then you move towards the Honolulu area, like where I am, close to where the University of Hawaii is. Then you have a smosh posh of everyone there, and it's kind of upper middle,
Mm-hmm.
and it's there. The further west you go, then you start seeing heavy Samoan groups, heavy Filipino groups. Sometimes they butt heads because they don't get along at times. Sometimes they do.
Right.
But then you got further west you go, it's lower income, lower education, and it keeps going down the further west you go. It's an interesting thing, and there's also the education system out here, which is that's
That'd be great.
no, you have a lot of people that drop out of middle school or high school because they feel like education is a haole or a white person's thing and they don't need it. And
Wow.
so you'll have a lot of girls that can reach the age of 18 or 19 or 20 and they've already got 2 or 3 kids. It's very interesting, and the media doesn't. They make it a point not to show a lot of the social and class, racial issues, the epidemics that are going on out here. They don't talk about it.
So I guess you mean like it's funny because you say that most of them kind of lean more conservative with their cultural values.
Yeah.
It's a hugely democratic aspect. Has Hawaii always been democratic? I mean, ever since its inclusion as a state, you know, and, I mean, I don't know. I'm not very familiar with Hawaiian history, and it's like we don't really need to go into it. But what do you think shifted? Like, what? I mean, I don't know anything about Hawaii. See, that's the fortunate part about my ignorance. Um, yet I feel like if it's not like white people or if it's Asians, it's like what at the end of the like what's the goal for Hawaii? What does Hawaii need in order to, I guess, for it to be better for say someone like you from what you can see? I mean,
Honestly, I don't even know what would be needed to fix Hawaii, because
mm-hmm.
it's so there's a false pretense, or you know how people say, "Oh, Ohana," because that's how we say family out here, or
Right.
Aloha spirit, and I'll be the first one to say, "Oh, that's bullshit."
Really?
It's a marketed thing for tourists.
This is news to me, man.
Uh,
So people don't say that stuff in Hawaii?
they do, but like the whole meaning of it, I would say, and this is my opinion, I think is bullshit, because there's so much division here that
Wow.
I don't know what could improve it. You know, I don't know. I mean, you have color. What's it called? Colorism. I think it's just racism towards one another based on like Micronesians are discriminated against, Samoans are discriminated against. If you're like me and you're mixed, or a mixed play, as we say, you're discriminated against because of the way you look, your features, your color. They don't know what to call you, so they will typically I'll be called a popolo, and that's equivalent to calling me the N word.
Pejorative, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. And the more Hawaii focuses towards tourism, is they're knocking down all kinds of places out here to build more and more condos and apartments. It's changing. It's changed a lot over the last 10 years, the
Mm-hmm.
last 15 years. And you also got the group that's pushing to quote unquote restore the kingdom of Hawaii. They want to restore it. Uh, that's a small group, but I don't know. I don't know. Like Oahu, this island has a lot of issues. I know Big Island has a lot. Maui's a lot more laid back.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Kauai is too, but there is a clash of modernism and traditionalism that's just not meshing.
Yeah, I was taught like back in like progressive studies like in school in college. So again, this is coming from more of a leftist standpoint that tourism obviously was very bad for Hawaii. It led to obviously the destruction of a lot of the native cultures. At least this is what I was taught, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously a lot of big conglomerates, people who were pushing tourism, were the commercialization of it was what was helping Hawaii's economy, but it wasn't really helping the native people in Hawaii. And I mean, let me like, so is tourism? I mean, is tourism necessarily a good thing for Hawaii, or is it only really just painting a specific picture as to what Hawaii is about, and not really what's going on in Hawaii? Like, overall, it doesn't sound like people are doing very well, are they?
I'd say it's more so just painting a picture. Like the whole concept, a lot of people, when they think of Hawaii, they think of paradise. Uh, and then when you try to tell someone, like, oh, no, we have a serious homeless epidemic, we've got a serious education epidemic, we've got, a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
violence. We don't have the shootings of like the mainland, but you have a lot of people getting beat up, a lot of tourists getting beat up, a lot of, thievery, raping, and human trafficking. But because of the image, the narrative that's pushed of what Hawaii is, a lot of people don't want to really talk about or accept what is actually going on here. And it's
Yeah.
like live in a bubble.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the same can be said for where I moved from, which was the San Francisco Bay. It was the same aspect, high cost of living, which I know Hawaii also shares that same aspect. A lot of homelessness, very, very heavily Democrat. Um, and it's not what it is portrayed to be. Like people think San Francisco is kind of like that jewel of the West Coast. It really isn't. San Francisco is kind of a shithole. And not just because of the hopeless epidemic, but it's just like there's not a lot of help when it comes to people who really do need the help at the end of the day. Now, the thing is, I think that with a lot of these Democrat-run cities, Democrat-run states, that's where the welfare aspect comes in. You know, my argument usually for that is because that's usually how it functions. They function and are able to handle your vote because they want to raise taxes, which in turn allows them to administer more welfare to people who are disadvantaged and go off of that. And that's how they stay in power, which is why there are places like, now that I know about, like Hawaii, some of our California cities that have seen very, very little progress under Democratic leadership. And it's the same with a lot of these more inner cities of like Baltimore, Detroit, you know, Chicago, you name it, basically, where it's like a lot of these problems aren't really being fixed because I guess we're just more partial to kind of just putting a Band-Aid over something that needs surgery. You know, it's like we're not really revamping the system. We're just kind of painting it over and throwing more money into the system by raising taxes and thinking that that's going to help, but it's not really doing anything. I think education is a major place where it needs to be reformed. With a lot of, I think, left-leaning ideologies, there's a, you know, I'm a big believer that a lot of Western universities now effectively brainwash a lot of their students into thinking a lot of these things. And also, let's not forget, right? University has become increasingly expensive, even though it's very, very highly liberal. And the crazy thing about it is that, you know, it's like that's another way they sort of get to you is they a lot of the democratic socialists, what they push forward is total debt consolidation, which is total loan forgiveness, because student loan is one of those things you can't get out with bankruptcy. So, you know, that's another way you kind of stay tied down to that, right? Is by following their programs. But it's essentially the same tactic of it's just like, you know, we're going to tax people to be able to pay for somebody else's decisions. And, you know, that's something that needs to be communicated more clearly to people. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be happening in a lot of these Democrat-run states. So I don't know. I'm not really sure where it's going with that. But, you know, I certainly hope Hawaii gets better. You know, I didn't really know much about Hawaii. Again, like I was telling you before we started this this talk, I was kind of looking up like Tulsi Gabbard and everything simply because dropping a video about her tomorrow. I mean, what has she done for Hawaii, and what do you think about her recent like announcement running for president and all of that? It hasn't formally been announced, but it's just kind of been thrown out there.
Well, the only thing I can say is good luck. I mean, because I haven't really seen much of what she's done out here. To be honest, it's yeah. I haven't seen any change. So, I mean, if she's running, good luck.
She's not exactly, you know, the token progressive liberal, unfortunately.
No.
So, actually, I think she shares a lot of centrist tendencies now that I kind of think about it. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that having a diverse Congress, for one thing, is somewhat of a good thing. But again, I know you included this a little bit in the questionnaire here. I wasn't a big fan of Rashida Tlaib or anything. I mean, primarily her because of her recent statements. But I think that that's what we're moving towards is more of a, like, we hate Trump, but we're not concerned with the livelihood of most Americans in this country. And that's where I think it needs to be revamped a little bit more. People need to work together, you know, under Republican or Democrat leadership to get things to work for the people. But it's just more of a, well, I don't like Trump, so I'm not going to cooperate, which is probably the reason why we're still in a shutdown.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of like Rashida Tlaib, let's talk about that because I saw your video.
Yeah.
That you did. It was really, really good. And I highly suggest anyone who's watching or listening to go and check out Zach's video on that. But I mean, she was sworn in on a Quran, which that raised an eyebrow for me. And then I think someone else 10 years ago did the same thing, but
Ellison did that.
Yeah. And it's one of the first things she says after getting sworn in is we're gonna impeach the MF. Like, really?
Yeah. No, I know it's absurd, and again, it's typical Trump derangement syndrome that has essentially infected a lot of these people. I mean, look at people that she's closely associated with, like Linda Sarsour, right?
Mhm.
Even Farrakhan to a degree, and it's like, why you're impeaching him based on the aspect that he essentially is a obstacle to a lot of the progressive ideals and political correctness. But the thing is, when again, she's just like any other typical, hypocritical leftist who claims to stand for women's rights and everything, yet the ideology that's being perpetuated is inherently oppressive to women. That's the one thing that I don't understand is when people are often critical of aspects of Islam for what is really the case. Not that we're anti-Muslim or anti-Islam, but that they're just aspects of
Mhm.
the ideology that are flawed. um, People don't really want to have a discussion about it because that's the thing. Threat of Islamophobia is one of those big things. But like we were saying before, she is a practicing. Well, she's not really a practicing Muslim. She doesn't really wear a hijab. I thought that the way she conducted herself wasn't very professional to begin with. It's not the fact that she said that. It's the fact that, like, I could have stood behind, okay, you swear in on a Quran. Okay, I get it. Keith Ellison did that. Ilham Omar did that, but she didn't arouse any controversy. It's the fact that that was the first thing she said when she got into office, almost like she's running the stuff. She speaks the truth into existence. That's
Mhm.
the famous Malcolm X quote right there. And she represents an ideology that is fundamentally flawed and is inherently oppressive to women, yet she claims to be passionate and that women can stand up and be strong. But the beliefs that you stand behind say otherwise. So the hypocrisy is the big thing that I have a problem with. And aside from that, I don't think that she sets, a decent example for a lot of other politicians that are coming in her way. The thing is, no one can really criticize her for that. When people have said, "Why did you say that?" It's like, well, I believe women can be passionate. I believe that we can say that. That is not a display of passion. That is not a way you conduct yourself. You can be passionate and not be profane. And I would like to think that a representative of the United States House would have a lot more composure and conduct herself accordingly. But it's a typical leftist, operating on emotion, not so much logic. She can't see past the fact that, this administration has done more for minorities than the previous administration. What are you going to impeach them for? How do you impeach someone for doing a good job? That's what my big thing is. And like, I don't know, it's just absurd how she claims that like Trump is a Nazi or a racist or everything. Yet Louis Farrakhan, has been recorded on video for saying obscene and crazy things like, "Well, if people think it's like I like Hitler." There's literally statements like that. Like people like to take sound bites out of other people, like out of conservatives, but we don't do that with Farrakhan. We don't do that to Linda Sarsour. And these people all have a past of anti-Semitic traits.
Didn't that one guy from CNN actually get fired recently for anti-Semitic uh, statements? I forgot his name.
Is he white?
No, black guy.
Oh,
Because he said a lot of anti-Semitic things at some type of summit, and then CNN actually they fired him and distanced themselves, and he wouldn't apologize for it. And it's something because you've got a lot of anti-Semitism that's just being okay, like they're okay with it.
it's selective, is what it is, And I think that because she kind of meets a lot of the criteria, I'm just going to say it as it is, of being a Muslim, being a woman of color, being a woman. And it's like you are inherently oppressed, so you can get away with saying whatever it is you want to talk about. I mean, that's the ideology when it comes to social justice, is because you are inherently oppressed and that somebody else is benefiting off of your oppression. You have the ability to get away with whatever it is you want to say. So nobody will really criticize Linda Sarsour for being anti-Semitic, yet they'll go after a man or an anchor on Fox News, MSNBC, or CNN. That's the problem that I have, And when I talked about that in my video about the big problem with Rashida Tlaib is the fact that we've become more accepting of that. I'm not saying that the fact that she's sworn on the Quran was unconstitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you need to swear in with a Bible. Keith Ellison did that. I mean, I think even Tulsi Gabbard sworn in with I think a Hindu document. It wasn't a Bible. She's not a Christian, and that's okay. But it's the fact that I think our country is moving towards a more accepting nature of things that are slowly going to not be constitutional. Things that we wouldn't expect from politicians, from Congress people. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being personable, but she was just profane. You're talking to the president here. And like, have we forgotten that, like, okay, you don't agree with a lot of what he says, yet you behave in this manner?
Yeah.
But okay, had she been a white woman, don't you think she would have been treated a lot different? Say a straight white woman, even. I think people would probably have treated her like Megyn Kelly was booted off her own show for making blackface comments in the past. I mean, it's insane, like where we are right now because of racial identity. You know, it's like I'm willing to bet Linda Sarsour could come in on any news broadcast and make some blatant racist statements towards other people, and you know, nothing would happen as a result. That's the thing. When you meet the criteria of victim status, you get away with saying whatever you want in America, and I'll say that right now. So if you're like, what is it, a woman of color, trans, gay, and the fact that like you're what's the last part? You're like you're disabled. I mean, you could probably get away with murder.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at, and that's my thoughts on Rashida Tlaib. You know, she's an elected congressperson. The thing is, I'll say this, man, she ran unopposed in Michigan, and I think that's the reason why she won. So, because it's just like I don't know how people can stand by people like this. It's insane.
What are your thoughts? Shout out to Amazing Lucas in the chat. He came in. He said, "Hate speech."
Hate speech. You know, I was talking with what were you gonna say, but it's just like anything that's subjective can be interpreted as hate speech. You know, it's just like I think like Coach Redpill famously says, like I think the New England Patriots are a horrible team. I mean, it's like, oh, you can interpret that as hate speech. There's no guiding principle to things that are so inherently subjective. So
it's just at this point, like we're just it really comes down to I don't like what you said, so I'm gonna try and do whatever I can to destroy you. And that's a dangerous game these people are playing. And you know, I wanted to speak about that, the whole hate speech thing. You have a lot of people out here who literally think that that's a law. Like, no, we're not in Canada. There's no such thing as hate speech in America. And then I had someone say, well, you got groups like the KKK that they can say hateful things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, they're protected under the First Amendment to freedom of speech. And then they're like, well, how do we defend against that? Oh, well, we have the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. You know,
right.
Like everything has a balance, but I'm really amazed at the amount of people that really think hate speech is a thing here in America.
No, and the Supreme Court also agrees with us. It's like it's not a real thing unless you're directly inciting violence on somebody else. You can basically get away with saying whatever you want. And the crazy thing is, this is where the leftist logic works out. Is when you say something, it must mean that it's racist, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that person may be a racist for calling you a pejorative or racial slur or whatever, but the impact of those words when it comes to racism does not nearly affect you enough that it's going to be the real racism that the left tends to perpetuate, which is like you can't get anything done because you are an oppressed group of people. What we've turned into our society now is because someone said something mean to you that you can't get anything done. So it's like it's basically a generation of crybabies that don't want to do anything and are just going to be complaining about a mean thing somebody said. And that's the reason why I'm still living at home in my mom's basement and I can't get ahead, is because somebody said something mean. The white man said something and the white man is oppressing me, and that's why I can't do anything. And that's where we're at. That's what I really think, is that it's just a generation of people that, like, you know, like, I mean, say what you will about boomers, but it's like you lived through a time period where racism was a real thing. Like there was real racism going on in the 20s and 30s. You know, when you listen to like Larry Elder's story about his father, mm-hmm. and when the Civil Rights Act wasn't even a real thing, not to mention people who grew up in the Depression, people who grew up post World War II America, right? And you think about the resilience and the adaptability of a lot of Americans that had to go through that, where it was like hard work was what fostered your path to prosperity and freedom. And now it's like you actually get certain privileges because you're of a minority group that white people don't get. Because now it's like, in addition to civil rights, there's reparations that need to be made. So that's why we have like diversity programs and affirmative action and programs that are specifically even housing that's just for like minority populations, that it's almost disproportionate now.
Yeah.
So it's like, even with all that being said, equal, if not even more preferential treatment for minorities, people are still complaining that racism is a major problem. Prejudice exists. There are racists out there. But racists also don't last very long in this country. Like, if you actually were a racist, like you were a white supremacist, there's what, only 2,000 actual white supremacists in this country. And it's like, are you going to get to any position of prominence? Are you going to even be able to do business with people if you actually feel that way? No. So it's like, at the end of the day, they're just words, right? Now, again, there are certain words that obviously people should refrain from using and not say. But the racism that people speak of, the emotional weight of it, people are interpreting it as being law, hate speech, right?
Yeah.
No, he was just mean to you, so don't worry about it. And it's like, that's all I have to say. You know, it's like, there are so many people that are living proof that they were able to get to the success that they wanted, not because of racism. And I think that it's like, if a woman got elected into president, or if there was the first Asian president or whatever, right? And say they didn't win the nomination, they didn't win the election, it would not be because of racism. It would not be because of sexism. It would be because maybe they, number one, failed to articulate a vision that a lot of American people could share in, or they just weren't cut out for the job. That's really it. But what the left has said is, like, because you dismiss certain people, you must be racist or sexist, which is why they get away with putting like people like Tess Holliday on the cover of Cosmopolitan. Body positivity, acceptance of like everything. It's like, I don't know. It's just become insane.
That leads into something else I wanted to ask your opinion on, because I had a friend who I was actually supposed to do a podcast with him today, but he's having some technical issues with his equipment and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But one of the things he wanted to touch on, because he's of the mindset that America was never great. Mm-hmm. And he really believes that. And then when I asked him, I'm like, why do you say that? He's like, well, I don't understand why people say, make America great again. It was never great. And then he'll go on to say that America was only great for white people, or if you're white, because it's not getting better for black people. Mm-hmm. And I'm just I looked at him, I'm like, are you really serious with that statement? And he's like, yeah, it's not getting better for us. And I'm like, how is that? How is it not getting better for us when we've got black millionaires and billionaires?
Right.
How is that? Dominating the music industry, dominating athletics, with all the groups that are out here running businesses. Like, we even had a Black Wall Street. How is it not better? Like, he's like, oh, well, it's because you can only get so far if you're black.
Really?
I'm like, according to who? And here's the thing, like, he even said, like, oh, well, I have to tell my kids, I had to give my kids the talk. And I was given the talk when I was growing up. And I guess for some of the people listening and watching, the talk that my friend was talking about was something most people in the black community do, mm-hmm. where they talk about that because of the color of your skin, you're going to always be at a disadvantage. You will never be able to get ahead because you're black. You'll never be able to do this because you're black. And it's a form of indoctrination. And right. It's so wrong. They also teach that you're always oppressed. No matter what, you're oppressed. If a waiter comes and he doesn't fill up your glass with enough water, it's because you're black. Like, it's everything that is because you're black. Like, I'm part black. I grew up poor. Like, when we left Samoa and went to live in Memphis, because my dad was a Marine, and we grew up poor there and didn't have anything, lived in a neighborhood where people were getting shot and killed every time you turned on the news. Like, 15 people got shot and killed today. X amount of people got killed today. You can't go out after 6 o'clock. And, like, I lived through that, and I made an active choice. this is not what I want. I want to have a better life for myself, for whatever kids I have in the future. If I get married, I don't want this environment. So because of that, I up and I left by choice. I put myself through college. I was, don't mind that. I can edit that out later. Anyway, I put myself through college. I went to college at 16 years old. You know, I put myself through college. I articulate myself better because English is not my first language. A lot of people don't know that.
Right.
You know, and I've been able to go from being poor to making currently 6 figures. I'm the first telephony analyst for the company I work for, first certified ever. And it's like, really? I didn't get here or overcome the obstacles that I had because of my color of my skin. It's because of what I actively chose to do. And then when I was saying that to him, he's like, oh, well, you're the exception. I'm like, okay, so if I'm the exception, then what are the parameters?
Yeah.
That define it? And he's like, oh, well, it's a spectrum. I'm like, that's such a cop-out.
Well, that's the thing is, like, when we were talking about white supremacy or white privilege, people keep moving the goalposts. They can't adequately define it, but they keep insisting that it exists and that every single person who's not white is being oppressed by some form of white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem I have. Now, here's the thing. I'm open to being schooled. But until you can adequately define it beyond some of just the little prejudices that people have, because, like, yeah, in isolated, you're going to encounter idiots and morons that are going to be racist, right? I get that. I'm not denying that. But, like, a system that is actively oppressing you that you can't quite define is where I take disagreement. And here's another thing, man. I mean, by the way, that's amazing, you know, your story, you know, that you're living proof of that, right? But so for someone else, I met them at a walkaway gala. For the life of me, I can't remember his name, but I remember, like, he had watched my YouTube video. He had seen my white privilege video. He heard my walkaway story. And I remember him coming up to me. This is a black guy, like a big black guy. He comes up to me. He's just like, dude, I really appreciate what you said. I have been homeless. I have been thrown in jail. You know, I've been used drugs, basically all the things that you shouldn't be doing, right? And the last thing he said to me is just like, dude, I've been homeless. I've been this, that, fired from my job, thrown in jail, and I've never experienced racism in my life. That was the last thing he said. And I was like, really? And, you know, he turned his life around. But it was because he realized that all of those circumstances were entirely his own actions, not because there was a white man out there that was throwing him in jail because he was black, or that he was homeless because he admitted that, like, you know, it was poor upbringing. He got brought up in a poor environment, but he changed his outcome. He changed his reality. He flat out realized, he was like, I've been through all of that, and I've never experienced real racism in my life. I've experienced, like, prejudice, like people maybe don't like me, but it's not racism in the sense of, like, there is oppression of your race systematically, as the leftists like to put, that's preventing you from getting ahead or changing anything. And until people can adequately define it, you know, that is what I believe. And also, let's also not forget, there's affirmative action that's in place and things like that, where I guess there are reparations to be made for people who previously have been economically or socially disadvantaged. And it's like, can you adequately define, like, and I'm opposed to affirmative action, but I don't have a problem with affirmative action being there. If anything, it helps our case. You know, like, there should be no excuse now. But I mean, that's currently the world we live in. It's indoctrination, and I think that it unfortunately comes from our education system, you know? So, yeah. It's crazy. But it's nice to know that there are people with common sense out there that feel that way. That's still, you know, it's like, that is the reality of it.
And, you know, like, one of the things, because I agree, like, I'm being completely honest, I personally have never experienced racism. I've experienced prejudice. You know, someone can say something to me that, okay, I mean, I like that. Okay, whatever. I'll dust my shoulder off. It doesn't affect me, you know. But I've experienced, and this is from my own personal experience, I've experienced more discrimination and hatred at me from fellow black people than I have from any other group. For me to say I like Trump, which I do. I don't agree with everything he says. I like Trump. I'm a coon. I'm a sellout. I'm an Uncle Tom. I'm all this. You know, when I don't toe the line for I'm an oppressed black man, or the white man's holding us down and this and that, then I'm considered, because I don't agree with it, I'm not black enough.
Yeah.
I don't understand the black experience because of the way I speak, because they say I speak white. I try to articulate, as I said, English is not my first language.
Right.
I have a speech impediment. Like I try to speak better, and because I'm doing that, I'm trying to act. Oh, you're trying to live up to whitey. You're trying to be like a white person. That's why, like, for instance, like if I were to speak about dating, we can talk about MGTOW and all that later. But like, if I were to talk about dating, I've never dated a black woman because of they'd say you act too white. You're not hood enough. You don't go along with this, and it's like,
yeah,
it's so weird. Like, I don't understand this. I'll say it. It's self-indoctrination,
right,
in the black community that really needs to be fixed. And I'm grateful for people like Amazing Lucas and Mike Magnificent, because they speak out against that nonsense, even Truth or Talk.
Right.
There's a lot of it, and I don't understand. I know some people say it's the oppression Olympics. I don't understand it. I don't get it, because I'm like, if I were in any other country, I've got to travel the world. America is the only country where I can go from homeless to successful by choice, by hard work.
Agreed, 100%.
Anywhere else you can't do that.
And in other countries, there's real racism that still happens in other countries. Like, they won't hire you based on race. Like, that is blatant racism right there, because you're basically at a disadvantage. They're not going to hire you based on race. That's like real racism. And that's the thing, is I'm glad that that's something that we can acknowledge. But here's another, there's instances where that exists in the mainstream too. There's a really famous, not really famous, but there's like a Lil Wayne interview where he's being interviewed panel style by a bunch of.
I saw that too. Yeah.
They just try to like bait him with race questions, and he flat out is like, "I've never had to deal with racism," and people were just like, "Wait a minute, dude! Like, your fans, like, they're all." It's like, dude, I have a lot of white fans too, and when you look at the concert crowds, they purposely not film the white people that are also there. And he's saying, I'm glad, respect to Lil Wayne for dodging the race baiting questions, but he was just like that. He flat out said it 3 times. He's like, I've never experienced racism. I've never had to deal. And let's be honest here, Lil Wayne is not exactly your token black guy, again, whatever that means, right? It's like he's covered in tattoos. He's a rap, he's a rapper, and the guy, will be the first to say, like, I've never dealt with racism. And he lived in the South, too, which most people think of as being considerably more racist than the rest of America. And here's Lil Wayne saying, yeah, no, I've never dealt with it. Yep. I mean.
But he's not towing the line. And the thing is, I've noticed that they try to get certain people to toe the line to affirm their belief. And like when they can't get you to do that, then they'll disavow you.
Yeah.
And it's
that's how they control you. That's how you control people, is when you make them feel helpless. I think what America needs to realize, like, the reason why the left does this is not because they actually believe that it's true, because it's not true. But when you make people feel like they're powerless, that they can't get ahead, that's the best time to basically save them from white supremacy or whatever. That's how you control people. And that's what the left wants. By convincing you that you're a victim. You're a victim of the system that no one can adequately define. And so many people, millions of people, have defied that. The fact that 90% of millionaires in our country, of minority populations as well, thousands of millionaires are all, 90% of them are first generation rich, which means it's not inherited wealth. So whenever people say, like, white people have all this wealth and everything, it's like, well, people move in and out of the 1% all the time. That's just how our economy works. People make dumb decisions, they lose a lot of money. People make smart decisions, they make money. It's not because capitalism favors wealth. Now, there is cronyism out there, but capitalism in itself, it's like, it benefits you. It actually benefits you. It knows no color, is what I'm saying. So if you make the right choices in life, there's no reason why you couldn't be successful. There's no reason for that. And that's the truest thing. There's more rich people today than there have been at any other point in history. And people are talking about, well, it's inherited wealth. I look at a rich white person, it's because he inherited. Nah, because 90% of millionaires and billionaires, for that matter, are first generation rich, which means they didn't come from a family where they were affluent. And that's an amazing, like that in itself should tell you about all the different twists and turns of living in America and dealing with our economy and with our system that allows people to succeed. So, how can racism be the sole reason for all the problems that exist in this country? Because everything always seems to come down to that, right? Doesn't everything, all of our social problems, always in one way or another seem to come down to either racism or sexism?
Yep, it does all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
And like you have thousands, if not millions, of people that despite all of that defy the odds. And it's like I don't believe it. I don't think that white privilege exists. I don't think that racism is a major problem. I don't think that systemic racism exists. I mean, racism still exists among people, but
systemic doesn't exist. I agree. Systemic racism is not there, and people don't want to accept it.
Right. So, I mean, man, that's what I have to say. It's crazy, and that's what the American people, I think, our young folks need to wake up to. You want to know something crazy, man? I've always talked, like, people ask me, like, what's the 2 things you would do to, I guess, like, change the education system, aside from a lot of the obvious flaws? You know what I think should be mandatory teaching in schools? Personal finance and intergender relations, as opposed to, like, marriage laws. Yeah. Think about that. If you put those 2 required classes in all schools in America, like not even sex ed is in every single school, right? But you put personal finance and you put like the ins and outs of marriage and family law, just a little intro on it, I think we would see a much more functioning, stable society. Even learning personal finance, because it forces you to make informed decisions, right? And I know so many people who have overcome what typically would have been racist constructs because they were more informed. And if you really think about it, like those are the only 2 real classes that I think people who graduate from high school ultimately need. You probably don't even need a college education. You're armed with what you have after you have all of that. And if you just have a little bit of personal finance education and navigating like the laws of like how the court system works with marriages, I think we would see a very, very high caliber of people coming out of schools just with that alone.
No, I agree, you know, because there's a lot of people that really are under this false assumption that you have to have a college education to be successful in America in this day and age. And it's like the advent of social media and the internet taking off, you can become successful without a college degree. You got the YouTubers that are really successful. Yeah. You've got people creating their own businesses and having stuff that they can sell or do, or services that they can do for people, like without a degree. I mean, even me, I'm in IT and information systems as well. And my degree is not even in, I have a marketing degree, marketing and small business development degree, which I'm not even using for my professional career. I just went and got certified through CompTIA, and I'm working in IT. And it's like, if I could go back, like I'm 30 now, if I could go back to when I was 16, 17, going into college, I would just say, hey, have something else, or maybe not even do college. I would just went after a skill set or a technical skill set versus this idea that we need a college degree to be successful. And it's untrue. We need to know how to do finances. Like you said, we need interpersonal relationships, because a lot of people lack understanding, fundamental understanding of those areas. So
it's crazy, right? All you need is interpersonal dynamics in schools, like marriage and family and personal finance. And if you really think about it, that's already enough to upset the rhetoric of the brainwashing in our current society. Think about it, right? Once you get a grip on those 2 things, you are already halfway red pilled, kind of. It's just like, wait a minute. Like, and you know, kids are young. They'll grow and make their own decisions. But man, you introduce just those 2 things in public education, mandatory in all schools, just like math is mandatory, just like English is mandatory. I think that, like, you know, if I ever held a position of office, that's what I would recommend. And we would see amazing sociological changes happen, you know, in our culture. Really, I really believe that. And it's just like that's all it would really take, you know. And then like I think college has kind of, you know, again, college has created entitlement culture too. You know, that feeds into it as well. It's like people are, you know, it's like hire me because I went to college and everything, or I went and studied this, and like they indoctrinate you in schools. Education reform needs to happen. I mean, these are people that are supposed to be able-bodied, functioning, skilled individuals, but you don't really learn skills in college. You just learn how to get a job, but it doesn't really teach you anything unless you go in and you decide to become a doctor or an engineer. Like you need school to do that. I get it, but you know, for a lot of other things, you don't really need a college education. I feel the same way, man. It's like if I could go back, I probably have spent that time working on building even a channel up, you know, because this is basically what I do now. And it's like,
yep. And I wanted to ask you something else since you brought up red pill. So explain to the audience that may not be aware of what red pill is and what it means to you.
I mean, the red pill can mean a lot of different things. I look at it as just seeing the truth regardless of what you've been taught in the past or anything, like seeing things for what they are. By, you know, prejudice, political correctness, or your feelings. That's what it means. So it can be applied to like politics. It basically just means you've decided to you know, accept the truth regardless of how bad it may seem, right? So I mean, like that's the thing. Commonly with the red pill, there's like politics, like oh, you walked away from the left, or there's the manosphere, which is also something that I know about, and about just, you know, the current system, the attack on masculinity in the feminized society that we live in. You know, being understanding the nature of women and everything, simply because a lot of these things that are talked about aren't looked on too favorably by women, maybe because they're so true. And that's really, you know, where I'm coming from. It's not because people like me who, you know, are red pill aware despise women or anything. I think quite the opposite. I love women. It's just that you learn to make better choices around women because you are more informed. So that's what it means to me.
And what is your take on the whole MGTOW movement? Because it seems like the push, especially in Western society, to feminize the societies, we've got this pushback from men and the MGTOW movement. And then you've got different variations within the MGTOW movement. You've got the group that's like, just fuck women all, you know, fuck them. We don't want anything to do with them. And then you got the group that's just selectively just choosing not disrespecting women, but they're choosing not to interact with them or not to work with them. I think there's been some cases where there are men who just don't want anything to do with them, like the streamer Ninja. He will not stream with a female because he's like, I'm not going to put myself in that position. And situations like that, and even the MGTOW movement, seem to just infuriate these feminists. And it's like, I don't know.
I think that if you decide to go your own way because that's the best choice for you as a man, then that's fine. If you want to work on yourself, by all means, go ahead. But I think that a lot of these people that really have a genuine hatred for women are the people who have deeper seated problems. You know, they need to look beyond that and go, like, people say, oh, I'm MGTOW, but I'm MGTOW because I'm working on myself. I think it's best that I just kind of, but you haven't entirely checked out of like not wanting to interact with women. But for those incelibates that basically decide that they want to go MGTOW and hate women because they've had no good relationships with women or never been with a woman, that's where I take issue, because there's more of self-hatred and narcissistic behavior that's going on. You know, it's like red pill awareness, MGTOW, whatever you want to call it. I'm red pill aware. It's more about being a better version of you at the end of the day because you know the truth, not because you belong to a coalition of men that don't like women. That's not what it's about. Everybody's doing their own thing, you know. As a matter of fact, the fact that when it's like sometimes I'll bring a woman on my channel and people just like get angry, and it's like, why? You know, why should it bother you? And that's the thing. That isn't that what it means at the end of the day? You're going your own way. So what other men are doing also shouldn't concern you. That's really, I think, what it means in every sense of the way, because it's just you. That's what you've decided to do. So when people get turned up and they get all like extreme with it, even a lot of these fellow men in the comment section, it's like, I think you have other issues that go beyond this aspect. It's not because any of us are tarnishing the reputation of the community or anything, if that's even what you want to call it. But it's like, just do your own thing, man. Chill out. I think that people who act like that have, again, like they just have other personal issues probably that they're dealing with, not because that's what MGTOW really is or red pill awareness. I'm not MGTOW, by the way. I mean, I still interact with women. It's like, I'm not going to check out or anything. So,
all right. And winding down to our last couple of questions, I wanted to get your opinion on how we've got the. I guess I'm really not sure how to put it, but the whole socialism thing. Why is that so popular? Why are we dressing up socialism by saying, oh, it's democratic socialism? It's entirely different. The people in the past, Venezuela and all these other countries, they just didn't do it right. Why is our generation so enamored with it?
Because they've never worked a day in their life is why. And I say that because you haven't paid
straight from the hip.
It's true, because until you feel the brunt of taxes, do you really want your taxes raised, especially if you've created something for yourself, or the fact that you have to pay for somebody else's stuff, even though you're not entirely responsible? Like look at Medicare, look at Obamacare, for example, right? Which is basically a socialist part. You were obligated to pay into it if you didn't have health insurance, right? And the thing is, you sometimes wouldn't even be able to meet the criteria because of certain demographics or pre-existing conditions, whatever it may be, but you were required to pay something on behalf of other people. The premiums were extremely high for people who, just wanted basic health insurance, right? But because it was subsidized in that matter, it was like, and you had to pay it as there were people that couldn't opt out of it. If you wanted to opt out of it, there was a penalty for it. It's not the case anymore. It's like, no, like I can decide that I don't want to have healthcare because that is something that I'm choosing to do. And let's also not forget, like with the reason why it's popular with our generation is because it's something that's taught in schools. It's kind of like everybody should kind of share everything. Everybody should just be given universal basic income. Because you've never really created anything for yourself. You haven't really worked yet. Until you decide that what socialism really is, high taxes and the fact that you have to give up your earnings, even though it has nothing really to do with you, but you have to pay for somebody else, then that's when people will start to be more tuned into it. And I say this because a lot of young people right now like socialist ideas, like debt forgiveness. Like, think about the millennial generation, right? Like, how many of us have student loan debt? Lots of us do. Yeah. It's so popular among us because a socialist ideal of free education and debt forgiveness of all is something that they promise, something that they push forward. That's why it's so popular. And until you enter the workforce and realize that, like, okay, now they're going to raise my taxes the more and more I work, you start to see it as something that isn't necessarily something you're favoring. And it also allows the government to exercise more control over you. You're obligated to pay for certain things that maybe, with limited government, you didn't have to. You have to finance all of these programs, even though, like, you may not get a cut of it. Like things like Social Security, I'm opposed to, because it's not really the way Social Security should work. If everybody was paying into an individual retirement account, then that would be fine, right? But that's not the case with Social Security. It goes into a big mutual fund. And if people can disproportionately draw out of it, even though they didn't adequately work for it. So I guess the point I'm trying to arrive to is socialism is not you get exactly with what you work. It's, in a way, it's like I am going to take somebody else's stuff that they didn't work for and give it to me, and vice versa. So it splits the blame amongst a lot of people for things that we typically would work for and things that we typically couldn't live without. It's popular because it's like we haven't lived long enough to really see it, in my opinion. And it impacts us at a personal level because of something like education.
Okay. Because, you have a lot of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's always pushing for, like, free healthcare for everyone and free education.
Somebody else paying for it. There's no such thing as free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you saw her 60 Minutes interview where she was attempting, I'm not even sure if I should say attempting or what that was, because I don't know what kind of explanation that was of how we're going to finance it. It seems like everyone who has asked her questions, even CNN, she
Right.
cannot come to a logical answer, and she masked it with this whole morality. Like, okay, I don't. She's like, oh, I know I make mistakes, but it's the intent behind it. It's my morality, and it's like, no, that doesn't. How are we gonna, like? I think the cost of her plan would be like what, 40 trillion, in the trillions.
Mm-hmm.
And even if the rich were taxed at the 70% that she wants, that still would not equate up to the rest of what will be required to push the policy she wants. And
It's flawed, yeah. I mean, it doesn't add up, and she's not very informed on the subject. I think she just says it because it sounds good to a lot of young people.
and it's just, I don't know. Like, she, like, do you view her as a potential threat to the right? Because I know Amazing Lucas did a video about it. I've thought about it too, especially when the right keeps making fun of her and saying she's stupid and all that. And I look at it in the reverse. This is exactly what the left did with Donald Trump when he got in office.
Well, I mean, I suppose anything is possible, but she's not very smart, is the thing. She's just not very smart. Like, Donald Trump could hold his own in debates. He had a clear plan for what he wanted. I think that this young lady is just being groomed to say certain things, not because she actually understands it.
Okay.
You know, again, like I said, anything is possible, but that's just, so yeah, she may be a threat to the right, but she can't really adequately articulately back up any of her views, and I think she'd be willing to jump ship if the opportunity presented itself.
Okay.
Honestly, so.
All right, so we're down to the last two questions, and I wanted to ask this one as well. Like, why is there this push to put like SGW stuff, feminism, LGBTQ narratives in, of all things, video games, and also movies and comics and children's books and cartoons? Like, why are we pushing so hard for more diversity, in other words?
Because everybody wants fair and equal treatment, even though we have that, and people feel like they're not getting enough representation of their own race, which is why they need to perpetuate it. And movies and mainstream media, like Star Wars, for example, completely ruined by the whole diversity thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I get it. We need more representation and everything, but don't make it just for the sake of diversity. Make it so it fits the point,
Yeah.
And I think it just kind of fits in with leftist ideology. That's just ideally what they're trying to appeal to as many people as possible. So I don't blame them. It makes them money, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Yeah.
I really feel like it's definitely ruining video games, because you have companies like Naughty Dog that are super, super SJW, and they're really pushing for the LGBTQ thing. It's, in their games, like Uncharted. I think the most recent one was Uncharted Lost Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And the two main female characters in the game, at no point in the game is there even implied or stated that they're lesbian, but the dev team is trying to push it on social media that they're a couple, that they're, they came to the realization that they're lesbians, and they want to, if they make another game, they want to push that narrative. And then you've got The Last of Us 2, where the first game was really good. I loved it. I enjoyed it as a cinematic experience. And now the second one, I don't really know much about the story. All I know is the focus is that Ellie is gay. And it's like, okay, why does her sexuality have to be the focal point of the story? Like, it's forced.
Right.
And that's my issue with it. Like, and it seems like it's just gonna keep getting worse. Like, even The Legend of Zelda, the most recent, The Breath of the Wild, they said that Zelda was a damsel in distress, and I'm like, wait, the narrative of the story is she held off Ganon for 100 years. That's not a damsel in distress. Like, what?
It's funny. Yeah. It's just, no, it's nuts.
But I mean, what's your thoughts, man?
I think that I don't really know. I'm not really plugged into that. I just think that it just plays into more of the culture that we're in right now. Feminist culture, you know, diversity culture, and everybody wants to appeal to the masses regardless. They just want to make money off of that, and that's a way to do it. So I don't think it's the best idea ever, but you know, I think if it destroys some of the creative media outlets that we have right now, then you know, I'm obviously not for it because let's not make things diverse for diversity's sake is all I'm saying, you know.
Okay. All right, and so the last question I want to ask you is about The Rock. He apparently there was an interview with him where he basically called this generation, you know, Generation Snowflake, and they're just looking to be offended at something.
Right.
And then he put out an Instagram video saying that he never said that and he would never trash talk anyone. And I'm like, wait, but that's kind of what your career has been made on. Like, what is your thoughts? Because it does seem like people are too afraid to publicly stand their ground.
I think that he should have stood by what he said because he's not wrong. You know, people are looking for a reason to be offended because they're taught that, not because they actually are that. I think I remember like back in college when people were like, "Oh, cultural appropriation, like that makes me offended that you wore." It's like it didn't actually really offend me, but you're taught to be offended when you see those things, not because it really impacts you personally. And from The Rock's perspective, I think he would have been a lot better off if he just stood by what he said. If he just said like, "Yeah, that's what I think," and that's it. I mean, The Rock's at a point now where I don't think saying things like that is necessarily going to be that damaging to him. I think it's more damaging when you have to release an apology and people are like, "Oh, whatever." But that commanded massive respect from me when he said that because he's not wrong. But again, you know, it's the mainstream media and it's more politically left leaning. So when you say things like that, people are going to be offended. And you know, it's the reason why comedians don't perform anymore. It's the reason why there's a lot of there's just because of political correctness, like nobody wants to speak their minds. And you know, it's the same deal with Kevin Hart, right? As I was mentioning before we had this talk, I think he should have just stood by what he said. You know, he's not wrong. We have a parenting problem in our country, and it's the reason why there's so many snowflakes. It's because a lot of these people have never really lived through anything bad. Like you don't deal with the things that your grandparents dealt with or anything, and we don't fully appreciate it. And these are kids that have grown into adults that have never been disciplined by their parents or anything. So what I think that I even said before is that we have a parenting problem, plain and simple. You know, more so than anything. Generation Snowflake are these kids that don't know how to. They don't know how to like do any. They don't know how to like move past that. Like, you know, how do you think diamonds are formed under in the end? It's formed under pressure. It's formed under, you know, it's like that's how it works, and you become better when things like that don't affect you. And what somebody says is just what somebody says, you know, not because it actually offends you. Like that's the thing with university, with SJWs and liberal culture, is they're teaching you to be offended when you see these things, you know?
Yeah.
These triggers or whatever. It's like, I don't know. I could go on for days, but those are my thoughts on that.
All right. So I lied. I actually have one last question for you.
Yeah, what's up?
Did you have fun?
Yeah, dude. No, I like talking with you. I mean, I like that it's a little bit eclectic, you know, but I think the next time we talk, we should talk about like other things, maybe like video games or whatever, just to kind of shake things up.
Oh, I'm definitely down for it.
Yeah. Nah, dude. I mean, what time is it over in Hawaii right now?
4:23 in the afternoon.
Nice. So I'm a few hours behind us.
Okay, I think you're 3 hours ahead of me.
Yeah, I'm 3 hours ahead.
So tell people where they can find you, man. Like, what are some upcoming projects you have?
Yeah, I'm gonna be just making more videos. I'm gonna be, you know, you can find me on Twitter at Zach Hing, which is already linked there. YouTube, same place. But yeah, making more videos, trying to get more guests on my channel, interviewing more folks, and yeah, just creating more content in general. You know, I pretty much do this full time, so you know, I keep my living expenses low so I can do this freely without the traditional 9 to 5. So.
See, I'm trying to get on your level, and I think hopefully by August this year I can do this full time.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
You know, we've got some big things going on with the channel, so I'm really happy about it. We're getting this spike in growth. I think over the last couple of days, we actually gained 1,000 subscribers, and I don't know what's happening, but I'm happy with it. But thank you, Zach, for being on the show. I mean, we definitely will be staying in touch.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Everyone, make sure you go, if you're watching, if you're listening, make sure you go over to Zach's channel and subscribe to his YouTube channel. Follow him on social media, Twitter, Instagram. The links to everything is down below. And you'll be able to catch this podcast. Obviously, you can catch it here on youtube.com/Mekel Kasanova. But you can also catch it on iTunes, Google Play Music, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, soon coming to iHeartRadio, and we will be on Sirius XM later on this month. So,
wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Doing big things, you know. Casanova Podcast, #1 Hawaii, because of all of you. Thank you for helping us get to that point in 1 year. So, hey. All right. And anything you want to leave the audience with before we end it?
No, but thank you. Thank you for having me on your show, Mekel. I really appreciate it. It was great talking with you. So thank you guys for watching. And yeah, hope you guys are having a wonderful new year.
Definitely. So everyone, we are signing out.